Ethan had never believed in fairy tales, but when he met Isabella, it felt like something out of a dream. He was a simple man, 25 years old, working 2 part-time jobs just to afford his tiny one-room apartment on the outskirts of the city. Life hadn't given him many luxuries, but he had a heart full of hope and a spirit that refused to break. They met at a local bookstore where Ethan worked on weekends. Isabella walked in one afternoon, a whirlwind of elegance and charm. She wore designer clothes, her shoes clicking confidently on the wooden floors, her perfume leaving a trail of expensive sweetness behind her. Ethan noticed her right away. How could he not? She was mesmerizing. He helped her find a book she was looking for, and she laughed at his awkward jokes. That laugh, it captured him instantly. She said she found him refreshingly different, not like the arrogant rich boys she was used to. Ethan, naive and starved for genuine connection, mistook her attention for something real. Over the next few weeks, they started seeing each other casually. Coffee dates, walks in the park, late-night phone calls where Ethan poured his heart out, believing he had finally found someone who saw beyond his empty wallet. But what Ethan didn't realize was that, for Isabella, he was just entertainment, a distraction from her boring, luxurious life. Still, Ethan fell hard. He began dreaming of a future with her, a small home, simple joys, a life filled with love. Every spare dollar he had, he spent on trying to impress her. Cheap flowers, handmade gifts, little notes tucked into her bag, small gestures that meant the world to him but were hardly noticed by her. As the months passed, Isabella's true colors began to show. She would tease Ethan about his job, calling it adorably pathetic in front of her friends. She would mock his beat-up old car, laughing at how it coughed and sputtered every time he tried to start it. Ethan laughed along, brushing it off, thinking it was harmless. After all, she liked him, didn't she? One evening, Isabella invited him to a party at a massive mansion, one of her friend's luxurious estate. Ethan hesitated. He had nothing fancy to wear, no polished shoes, no expensive watch. But Isabella insisted, telling him, "Don't worry. Just be yourself." Ethan showed up in his best, a clean but faded button-down shirt and his only pair of decent shoes. As he walked into the shimmering ballroom, he felt the weight of 100 judgmental eyes. The guests were dressed in designer suits and sparkling gowns, sipping champagne and whispering behind crystal glasses. Isabella spotted him and waved, but instead of rushing over with the warm smile he was used to, she barely concealed a smirk. She pulled him into a group of her rich friends, introducing him mockingly as "my charity case." The words stung, but Ethan smiled weakly, thinking it was just her sense of humor. It wasn't. The night grew worse. One of Isabella's friends loudly asked Ethan what he did for a living, and when he modestly answered, they burst into laughter. Another offered him a tip for serving drinks. The final blow came when Isabella herself, slightly tipsy and careless, laughed and said, "He's cute, isn't he? Like a little stray puppy. I picked him up from the bookstore." Everyone roared with laughter. Ethan stood there, frozen, the humiliation sinking deep into his bones. He forced a smile, pretending it didn't hurt, but inside, something cracked. For the first time, he saw the truth. To her, he was never a serious boyfriend. He was a joke, a plaything to parade around, someone she could feel superior to. As he turned to leave, Isabella caught up with him near the entrance. "Oh, come on, Ethan, don't be so sensitive," she said, rolling her eyes. "You knew this would never be serious. Look at us, we're from different worlds. Be realistic." He looked at her, really looked, and saw not the enchanting girl he had fallen for, but a shallow, cruel person who took pride in stepping on others to lift herself up. Without a word, he walked out of the mansion, the laughter echoing behind him. That night, Ethan sat alone on the cracked steps of his apartment building, staring up at the dark sky. His heart was shattered, not just because of Isabella, but because he realized how foolish he had been to believe that love alone could bridge the gap between poverty and privilege. He made himself a silent promise under the stars. One day, he would build a life so extraordinary, so untouchable, that no one would ever laugh at him again. Not her. Not anyone. And that was the night Ethan's real story began. The days after the party were some of the darkest Ethan had ever faced. At first, he drifted like a ghost through his routine, clocking into his jobs, smiling politely at customers, going home to an empty apartment. The memory of the laughter, Isabella's cold eyes, the pitying looks, they haunted him like a broken record stuck on repeat. But anger is a strange thing. Left unchecked, it can destroy a man. Directed properly, it can create something unstoppable. One morning, as he sipped on a cup of cheap coffee, Ethan caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror. He barely recognized the man staring back at him. Tired, defeated, small. And something inside him snapped. He slammed the coffee down, wiped his mouth, and whispered to himself, "Never again." From that moment, Ethan changed. He realized no one was coming to save him. There would be no lucky break, no magical rescue. If he wanted a better life, he would have to carve it out with his own bloody hands. He quit his second part-time job and took a risk, a massive risk for someone in his situation. He spent every last dollar of his savings to enroll in an online tech bootcamp. It was brutal, 8 hours a day of coding tutorials, late nights filled with endless lines of code and debugging errors that made him want to tear his hair out. He lived on ramen noodles and dollar store coffee. He couldn't afford nights out or distractions. He had no time for heartbreak. There were nights when he sat staring at his computer, exhausted, broke, and wondering if he was making a huge mistake. But then he would remember that night at the mansion, the sneers, the jokes, Isabella's mocking smile, and he would push through another hour, another lesson, another sleepless night. After 6 relentless months, Ethan landed his first freelance gig, a small coding project for a startup that paid him barely enough to cover rent. But it wasn't about the money. It was about momentum. One project led to another. He built a small portfolio. Companies started noticing him, offering bigger and better opportunities. He didn't stop there. Ethan realized early on that working for others would never give him the kind of power he needed. He didn't just want success, he wanted to be untouchable. So, he started studying not just coding, but business, marketing, finance, investments. He spent every spare moment reading free books online, watching lectures, taking notes like a madman. In the 3rd year, he launched his own tech startup, a simple app that helped small businesses manage their online presence better. It was rough at first. He worked 18-hour days. He faced rejections from investors, skepticism from friends, and countless moments of self-doubt. But he kept going. Every rejection was fuel. Every failure was a lesson. And then, finally, something clicked. His app caught fire. Word of mouth spread like wildfire among small businesses desperate for affordable online solutions. Clients flooded in. Revenue doubled, then tripled, then quadrupled. Within 2 years, his startup was valued at several $1 million. He hired a team, moved into a sleek downtown office, and bought himself a modest but beautiful apartment, not because he wanted to show off, but because he had earned it with blood and grit. By the time he was 30, Ethan wasn't just successful, he was a phenomenon. Tech magazines ran articles about him, the self-made millionaire who started with nothing. Podcast hosts lined up to interview him about his journey. He smiled politely during interviews but rarely spoke about the real reason behind his fire, the night a girl laughed at his dreams. He didn't need revenge anymore. His success was his answer. His peace was his victory. Until one ordinary Tuesday afternoon, fate brought the past crashing back into his life. Ethan was reviewing resumes in his office. His company was expanding, and they needed fresh hires. A stack of applications lay before him, each with hopeful cover letters and polished experience. He flipped through them mechanically, mind already moving ahead to the next board meeting. And then he froze. There, neatly printed on expensive paper, was a familiar name. Isabella Hart. For a moment he thought he was imagining it. But no, there it was in black and white. Isabella was applying for a marketing assistant position at his company. The same Isabella who had once humiliated him for being poor, now seeking a job in the empire he had built from scratch. He scanned the resume. Internships, short stints at luxury brands, a lot of fancy names but nothing impressive. And tucked quietly under reason for leaving previous employment, A line that said it all. Family financial downturn, seeking stable opportunity. Ethan leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. It would have been so easy to laugh. To call her in and humiliate her the way she had humiliated him. To remind her of the night she called him a charity case. But Ethan was no longer that broken boy. He smiled, a real, genuine smile, and set her resume aside without a second glance. He had already won. And soon, Isabella would realize exactly how much. A week later, Isabella walked nervously into the towering glass building that housed Ethan's company. She wore her best suit, heels clicking on the polished marble floor, clutching a slim portfolio in one hand. On the surface, she looked composed, polished even, but inside, anxiety gnawed at her. Life hadn't gone the way she had planned. After her family's wealth collapsed due to a series of bad investments and scandals, Isabella had found herself stripped of the security she'd always taken for granted. Friends who once adored her vanished overnight. The glamorous parties, the designer wardrobes, the vacations in Europe, all gone. Now, she was just another desperate job seeker, hoping for a chance. She didn't know who owned this company. She had simply applied, thinking it was a promising tech firm with growing potential. She had no idea she was about to come face to face with the man she once publicly humiliated. A receptionist greeted her warmly and guided her into a sleek, sunlit conference room. Isabella adjusted her blazer, smoothed her hair, and tried to steady her breathing. She needed this. She had to impress whoever was coming to interview her. Minutes later, the door opened. She turned toward the sound, and froze. Ethan walked in, dressed sharply in a tailored suit, his presence commanding, his face calm and unreadable. He carried a tablet and a pen, looking every inch the powerful CEO he had become. For a heartbeat, Isabella couldn't speak. The room seemed to tilt. Her mind raced back to that cruel night years ago. The bookstore boy, the shy smiles, the mocking laughter. This couldn't be happening. But it was. "Good afternoon," Ethan said coolly, pulling out a chair across from her. His voice was steady, professional, utterly detached. "Let's get started." Isabella stumbled through the first few questions, her words tumbling over each other. She tried to regain her composure, answering as confidently as she could, but Ethan's calm, piercing gaze unnerved her. He didn't mention their past. He didn't even acknowledge it with a hint of recognition. To him, she was just another candidate. Insignificant. Finally, Ethan set the tablet down. "Tell me, Isabella," he said, steepling his fingers under his chin. "Why should we hire you?" She opened her mouth, the rehearsed answers ready, but something inside her cracked. The facade crumbled. She looked into his eyes, searching for the boy she once knew, the boy she had laughed at, discarded like trash. But he wasn't there. This was a man who had built himself from the ashes, who owed her nothing. Tears pricked her eyes. She hated herself for it. She hated the shame that burned her cheeks, the weight of regret that crushed her chest. She faltered, lowering her gaze. "I made mistakes," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "I was foolish. I thought money made me better than others. I thought kindness was weakness. I see now. I was wrong." The room was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. Ethan watched her quietly, his expression unreadable. Part of him, the wounded boy inside, wanted to revel in this moment. Wanted to throw her words back at her, to crush her the way she had crushed him. But he didn't. Because he had outgrown that need for revenge. Because real power wasn't about making others kneel, it was about standing so tall that their insults couldn't even touch you anymore. Ethan picked up her resume and placed it neatly back into the folder. "Thank you for coming, Isabella," he said, standing up. "We'll be in touch." Isabella stood up too, her heart heavy with unspoken words. She wanted to apologize. She wanted to beg for a second chance, not at a job, but at being seen differently. But she knew it was too late. As she reached the door, she paused and turned back. "Ethan," she said softly, voice trembling, "I'm truly sorry." For the first time, a small smile touched his lips, not cruel, not mocking. A genuine, bittersweet smile. "I know," he said simply. And with that, Isabella walked out of the conference room, out of Ethan's life, carrying the crushing weight of her mistakes. Ethan stood there for a long moment, staring at the door she had just closed. Then he turned back to his desk, picked up his next candidate's file, and moved forward, leaving the past exactly where it belonged. Outside, the city buzzed with life. Ethan stepped to the window and looked out, the sun casting a golden glow over the skyline. He smiled to himself, not because he had gotten revenge, but because he had risen so high that no one could ever drag him down again. The boy they laughed at was gone. The man they could never touch had taken his place. And his story was just getting started.